Hello everyone and welcome back to the 40th episode of the Road to FIDE Master series. It's been quite a lot of them so far, plenty of more to come. This time I will be analyzing the round number 3 from the Roketas Chess Festival, in which I got paired with the Daniel Kopylov from Germany. FIDE Master rated 2435. One fun fact for you guys: I am having the Road to FIDE Master series, let's say. Hopefully, in the future years, I will be fortunate enough to record also Road to an International Master. But why am I mentioning that? Well, because in my life, even though I am rated over 2200, so it's quite close to those guys with the IM titles and GM titles, I actually have never won against such a player. I have plenty of draws against EMs and like IMs and GMs, but never win. So when you are facing a player over 2400, you expect them to have such title. But this time, even though I got such opponent, he had only, let's say, FM title, meaning that even if I play an amazing game with black pieces and I win one, I am still not having any IM crushed. So that's life, and that's an intro, let's say. Let's stick to the games. However, this was the second round of the day. As you know, during the first morning round, I drew. This time, a draw would also be a nice result. However, that was not my approach, let's say. I just wanted to play a nice game and see what's going on, and let's see together. My opponent opted for d4. I'm not even sure what did I expect from this game. I believe that I was preparing mostly for e4, and d4 I said to myself, we'll see, we'll figure that out over the board. Was it a good approach? I'm not sure. Thankfully though, after d5, c4, e6, which is Queen's Gambit declined, my opponent opted for knight f3 move, which allows me to play Janowski variation, which is a6, in a way that I just simply like. And that's what happened. My opponent knew the theory, let's say, and took on d5. This a6 move is a tricky one. My hopes are, if my opponent, let's say, play g3 move, I can take the pawn, try to play like that, and just simply keep the pawn, if that's possible. And yeah, that's why white should usually take immediately. That's what my opponent did. And now knight c3. So in here there are basically three main moves that you can consider. The most natural one would be to play knight f6, and the other not so natural ones would be to play h6 or c6. As you can tell, making like 5 moves all with the pawns with black pieces does not seem promising. However, both h6 and c6 have a similar let's say merit to them, because the point is that I would be willing to develop knight to f6 only if I knew that the knight will not be pinned. So that's more or less the case. I would like to delay this development and see if the bishop goes to f4 or not. And in this game, out of 3 moves, I decided to go for the c6 one, after which my opponent played bishop g5 anyway. So after bishop f4, let's say, now I would play knight f6. After bishop g5 though, I am not playing knight f6 because it would allow myself to be pinned. Why would I do it? And that's more or less the idea of this variation, because as of now I have the opportunity that I don't normally have, which is bishop e7. And after the exchange I can take with the knight, and the hopes are that I will be able to place the knight on a great d6 square, which is a very good one for the knight in the Carlsbad structure that we are having in this game. So already as of now I felt like I'm fine, and by the, let's say, body language of the opponent and the amount of time that he was spending on the moves, I was debating, okay, there are either of the two things happening. He knows the theory, but he knows I know the theory, so that's why he wants to go away from it. Or he actually does not know the theory, which was actually more surprising. But looking at the moves, I mean, more like logical assumption. So I was like, still not too confident about it, but I felt my chances are better and better. And yeah, let's see how the game went, because after e3 castling that both moves are normal ones, b4 was played. And that's the move that you often see in the Carlsbad structures, because white is willing to play b4, a4, b5, trying to attack my queenside pawns, and it's called the minority attack. It felt a little bit premature because, like, why wouldn't you develop the bishop? Why wouldn't you develop the queen? Why wouldn't you castle first and then maybe go for some active play on the queen side? Usually you are a little bit like waiting with that. b4 already cuts out, for example, the opportunity to play queen b3, which is normally not played that often in the CARLSBAD structure in general, but in this variation, however, with this a6 variation with my bishop still being there and so on, queen b3 might be useful because it's a little bit paralyzing my development. So yeah, before I would consider as an inaccuracy. I forgot to give that sign to this move, but when I saw this, I was happy. Also because after bishop f5, I was mostly expecting bishop d3 with the hopes of, you know, getting the position similar to like that one. And it's a dream. It's a dream for black. As you can tell from the eval bar, it's like around 0-0, but it's a dream for black because on the queen side there is nothing going on for white really, and we can slowly be thinking about pushing on the king side if white king castles there. So yeah, and that's the dream situation. However, my opponent went for bishop e2, and only now I realized, okay, maybe there is some tricky line that I'm not familiar with, because now opponent avoids the trade. Now I don't have the f5 square as a route for my knight to jump to d6, so either I have to use some c8 square, which seems weird, or I just have to abandon the idea. So yeah, I've spent some time here and I've decided that I will be going for yet another possibility which arises in those structures, which is that after knight d7 castle, I played b5. And once more, I forgot to put an exclamation mark because I believe it's a very good move. Why is that? Normally, you don't see such moves because it weakens the c6 pawn. But in order for this pawn to be really a weakness that opponent can exploit, he would have to develop a little bit differently before, so that the pressure can be put to this pawn immediately. And if that's not the case, b5 is a helpful move because it solidifies the c4 square for my pieces. I'm meaning the knights, and I can jump with this knight there or this knight there and so on. And the point is that I am actually not only able maybe later on to play on the king side, but as of now I am taking away the minority attack from the opponent. I was waiting with the b5 move because, for example, if I played it now, I was unsure if after a4 knight d7, a5 is it good or bad for the opponent, because it takes away the b6 square from me. It makes this pawn a very, very big weakness though, so I was unsure, and since I was unsure and I expected castling here from white anyway, I decided to give myself this one additional tempo, playing knight d7 now, and after castling b5, because now after a4 I have knight b6, a5, knight c4, and that's not problem for me. So that's why I guess after b5, a4 was not played. Opponent had to go for some other lines, and in the end he went for knight d2, which is kind of a nice move actually, I would say, because this knight didn't do much as of now, and it's going for the queen side, which is the side of the board that plenty of things are happening right now, so I like that move. However, I am just allowed to play a5 and create the b4 weakness. So after b5, all the next moves until like move number 20 seemed, sorry, not 20, 15, seemed quite natural to me. So a5 takes on b4, knight b6, queen d6 hitting the pawn, and only now I was like, okay, I did everything like in the book, let's say, right? So I played this variation, achieved a structure in a good way, played what's normally alright, I got the position that surely is fine, but what to do now? I was unsure because this whole maneuver really caught me off guard, let's say. I think that it's very inventive from my opponent because as of now the knight is stopping the pressure to the b pawn. I'm not sure then if knight c4 is a desired move, because maybe after some exchanges, let's say, like that, e4 might be the move and white would be creating a big pawn center. If I take the with the other pawn, maybe some b5 move might be annoying, because as of now I was unsure if this is a strength of mine that will be uh, like balancing out this weakness. Yeah, plenty of strategical nuances there, and let's say for my head it was a little bit too much. And if that's the case, as I've said, I did everything all right. What to do now, I really don't know. I've spent plenty of time around here, and I found some idea. And by some I mean the one that I was not happy with, not happy about, like unsure if that's even okay, and so on. Thankfully, though, after the game, I found out that it was actually okay. And yeah, what was the idea then? My idea was to play queen g6. Queen has done its purpose of attacking the pawn, nothing more there to look at. So I went to g6. The point is that I will be trying to play a move like that, because if my opponent does not react, I have move like this. Okay, actually in here bishop f1 is the possibility, trying to keep an eye both here and there, but let's say any other move like happened, I can then try to play something like that. First of all, planting my knight and unattended, let's say, and also I can try to look for some ideas hitting those squares. So yeah, queen g6 had some merit to it. However, after like king h1, I don't have bishop h3, I don't have knight c4 as a follow-up, knight f5 as a follow-up, so what to do now? Still not sure. But when thinking about queen g6 idea alone, I found that I might try trading the rooks, taking over the a file, and now trading the bishops, because what my opponent did with bishop e2 move 10 moves ago was that he avoided the bishop trade. And even though it seemed like, okay, now my bishop is better, let's say comparing this one, this bishop to this one, I just felt like it's making my knights not so well coordinated. I really would love to jump like that. I was really unsure if that's good enough too. So I decided, okay, maybe let's just simply try to exchange the bishops. So if my opponent would take, I will happily take. If my opponent would play like that, perhaps I would either take or play queen c8, and then I was happy with my drawing chances, let's say. If my opponent refuses to trade, I can go back. If he goes back, I am happy with a draw. Once more, playing the ball into the garden of my opponent, and trying to ask him, okay, what should you and would you do now? I'm happy with a draw, so it's your turn. And basically the only like problem with that move was the move f3, and I had to think about the what's next after f3, because it kicks away the bishop, but at the same time weakens the structure a little bit. So when looking at the queen g6 move, I found that in here I can play bishop e6, which seems counterintuitive, but since my bishop didn't have much going on for himself, I would be actually more than happy to see him traded. And if that's the case, let's just sit him there. Let him sit there. It protects the d5 pawn. It gives the f5 square. Now the knight to f5 would be additionally good because of the pressure to the e pawn. So yeah, even though I was struggling a lot to find the plan for this part of the game from the move number 15 to 20, I came up with that. It's computer, engine, human approved, wherever. So yeah, I navigated it quite well, so I'm happy with that. And also, when we look at the next stage of the game, after bishop d3, queen h6, queen c1, knight f5, trade, e4, trade, bishop e6. When we see at this position and compare it to the previous one, plenty of exchanges happened. Whether they were favorable for me or not, it's maybe a tough question to answer, but the point is that I was happy with what I've got, meaning that thanks to the bishop I am still having the control, maintaining the control over the light squares, therefore also taking control over my weaknesses, mostly on c6, and I felt like those two are also the weaknesses that I can rely on when fighting for a draw, let's say, because I felt like even though I had a comfortable middle game, never was I really going for a big advantage. So yeah, my opponent now opted for h4, normal move, making space for the king, making some space on the king side, and asking me what I want to do. And in such moment, you can either play a move with 5 seconds or with 15 minutes, basically nothing in between, because if you want, you can just simply copy the opponent, play h5 or h6 or g6. If you don't see the difference within 2 seconds, you can just flip a coin or whatever in your head and decide for either of those three moves. It's like none of those will lose you a game, perhaps. And if you want to be super precise and all that stuff, you can think about it for 15 minutes. I decided to play it faster, I guess, because yeah, the time trouble was a thing during my previous game, so I decided that I don't want to face that in this one too. So I went with g6, which seemed the most natural out of those moves that I have highlighted, and my opponent went with knight e2. And it's not like I panicked here, but I was starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable for the first time during the game, because knight f4 with the threat to the bishop is quite a big problem. So I had to spend some time then here. So I'm glad that I didn't spend it one move ago. And yeah, in here I am more than happy that I found d takes e4 continuation. It's based once more purely on the calculation, as you saw in the previous game. So yeah, whenever in strategic problem, go for the tactics. The point is this: if knight e6 happens, obviously such move would be not like disastrous, but quite unpleasant to continue, because like those pawns can never win me a game, only can lose one. But after knight e6, I would take on f3 once more, and the point is that if my opponent takes back, I take, he takes, I have knight d5. After he takes the pawn, I can either go for this move, basically guaranteeing myself a draw, or I even found from the distance that I can try to play rook a1 check, rook a2 with some, triple fork stuff, and after king f1 I can now try to take the pawn, because the rook is so active that I might get something more out of this. So I was more than happy to see that d4 is the best practical move. My opponent took on e4 too, and with that exchange I opened myself up for the bishop c4 move, the square that I was hoping to play to with any piece for the whole game basically, and finally I got it. And after knight f4 that I expected, I would be playing rook to d8, hitting the pawn, and after the protection I had a cheeky idea of playing knight a4, which I believe is a great one. And the point being that if my opponent takes, now this pawn with this bishop and the rook, I mean, this might be a problem for the opponent, and if he does not take, my knight gets activated. So I can even maybe try to repeat the moves with some like knight c3, rook d2, knight b1, rook d1, knight c3 moves and so on. So yeah, all right with that. However though, my opponent at this point, instead of going for the natural continuation as he started, he just after knight e2 jumped back. And it was a very nice move, as nice as I even put the exclamation mark to it. The point being that instead of going for some f4 square, which now seems like irrelevant, why would we ever jump there? There is nothing like in the future for the knight. Opponent tries to solidify the situation and tries to take away the a4 square, let's say, from my knight a4 idea and so on. So really nice. However, I just felt okay. If it's going back, it cannot be that like harmful to me. So I decided to just try to play king f8, king e7, bring the king to the center of the board, and also I had one crushing idea. And the execution of this one is like that. My opponent in here had around like 20 minutes. I believe I had similar amount of time. Note that there is no time control, so no half an hour increment after move 30 or 40. And in here I spotted the idea that this center is looking so nice that I might be trying to break it, and f5 move is the way to go, because either after the exchange or the push I will get the d5 square for my knight, for my bishop, d4 pawn might be a weakness and so on. So I decided this is the move number 29, to play a move like this and to play a move like this with the draw offer. So with that, I hope to achieve this. My opponent now thinks that I only want a draw, and he might get a little bit relaxed, and then I will meet him with f5. This was the idea. And obviously I was not, let's say, worried about him accepting the draw offer, because I felt like probability of that is like 10%. And even if it happens, I'm okay. Nevertheless, he went for king f2, rook a3, king e3, f5. And now I changed the dynamic of the position from being a scared little guy with like CM title, hoping and begging for a draw, to a guy that says, okay, you didn't want a draw, let's fight then. And it turned out to be an amazing weapon, amazing idea. Not really sure how much of it was that draw offer, how much of that was actually that f5 is a good move. But the point is that from the 20 minutes that my opponent had just 2 moves ago, within the next 3 moves, he went to 3 minutes. So after f5, there are plenty of problems. E takes f5 is not like out of question, but after gf, I have knight d5 threat, so king d2 has to be played. I can activate my king. I still have all the active pieces. I'm taking over the initiative. So e5 feels similar. h5 seems creative but maybe slow. So king f4 is the choice of my opponent. Seems alright. I then just simply take. My opponent takes. I give a check. He takes. I take. And yeah, just with those few exchanges, I am having myself a rook and the bishop endgame versus rook and the knight. I knew that this is the dynamic that favors me due to 2 reasons. First of all, bishops are better with the rooks, knights are better with the queens. Since we have the rooks, I have the better pair of pieces. Second of all, the pawns are on the 2 sides of the board, and it's also making the bishop look better than the knight. Also, I just gained like 15 minutes of my opponent, so happy to see that. And even though he reacted quite well, let's say, because he went for rook e1 takes, we entered the rook endgame in which I have the time, I have the initiative, he has the weaknesses, and I don't have anything to prove. He has to play actually the best possible moves to survive, and let's see how it went. I started with rook b3, hitting the pawn. He played the same, hitting my pawn. And already as of now, I played a move that was not the best. And this is the like everlasting dilemma, right? Should I play against the opponent's clock? So should I play fast as him and not use my time to think about the nuances in the position? Or should I use my time to think about the nuances in the position, allowing my opponent to think on my time about them too, and seeing who is better in those nuances, let's say. So yeah, this is, as I've said, always the dilemma. I went for the former idea, which is to try to play fast, and I've missed one very nice idea because I played king d6 and then h5 was played. Very good practical choice, even if it was not the best objectively. Practically, it's a fine choice because it reduces the amount of pawns on the board. And the difference between king d6 and king d7, which was the best move, is that after h5, an exchange, if I ever lose the pawn on g6 with some rook maneuver like that or like that, wherever, this pawn loss will not come with a check. And as we know, checks, tempos, etc. are very important in such type of an endgame. But the question is, with more amount of time spent here, would I actually see the h5 move and the differences between those two? Not so sure anyway. But yeah, h5 happened and I decided, okay, I just have to accept the fate and what's going on. So I took the pawn, my opponent exchanged, played rook c5, very powerful move with the idea of rook g5, rook g6. Also powerful because rook on g5 protects the g2 weakness, so my rook b2 move would not be helpful at all. So therefore I went for b1, because after rook g5 I can give a check and play rook e6. and that was basically the only way for me to protect the pawn. And we achieved the rook endgame, in which I have one more pawn, but my rook is passive, my king is kind of passive, and perhaps with the good play from both sides it's still a draw. But we have to still have in mind this time trouble of my opponent, and he now played king c3, opening one little idea for myself, which I took, and I'm very happy that I did. So I believe that king d2 would be a little bit more precise, because at least it's not allowing my rook to be activated. My king is not allowed to be activated either because of the white rook. My pawns, I don't like pushing them because then it might be lost, so I'm kind of stuck. I don't see a clear way to progress. Maybe I can try to reroute the king to this side of the board, but then what to do with those pawns, how to push them. So yeah, plenty of problems. Queen c3 though allowed me a new idea that would not exist in this previous variation, which is rook e3 check and rook a3. So I'm very happy. That's why I gave myself an exclamation mark, because instead of sticking to the pawn advantage and trying to make use of that, I decided, okay, if opponent is in the time trouble, let's go for the activity instead of the pawn advantage that I don't know how to use, right? So I went with that, happy with the decision. Obviously, objectively, it's not the greatest one. Practically, I would take it all the time, all day. So yeah, how did my opponent react? He did not take the pawn on g6 yet because there is no rush, right? The g6 pawn will be lost anyway, so he started with king c2. I played b4, king d2, rook c3, and since there are no useful moves with the king, he finally took the pawn, allowing my king to activate too. So the world will be amazing if I just had the king c4 move, after which my both pieces would be activated, my pawn would be a passer, that is an advanced one, and so on. However, with this rook g4 idea, it's not only about protecting the pawn, but also after king c4, there is d5 check. That's the problem. And since it comes with a check, I cannot ignore it. I cannot take the pawn with a pawn. I have to take it either that way. I mean, okay, I might be still getting the pawn advantage, but we all know the Philidor position. And if I try to go there, I won't be ever winning that, because the pawn can just, go like that, push the pawn, bring the king, give the rook for the b pawn, and so on, so on. Plenty of drawing routes. Like even d6 might be problematic for me. I have to be the one precise here. So yeah, not necessary. And if that's the case, how can I play now? So I found a very nice maneuver, because if it was white to move, the problems are kind of similar, right? So how can white play now? So I'm in kind of a Zugzwang. I wanted to deliver a Zugzwang to my opponent, so I played rook b3, rook a3, and I went back. And now it's up to my opponent. How does he want to play this position? And the position is not that easy, because rook is glued to the defense of the pawns. King should be glued to the attack to the rook, because if it goes away, my pawn is free to go further up the board and maybe promote. So yeah, what's the idea here? And there is basically only one idea that draws the game for white, and in order to achieve that, white would have to understand that g pawn is not that relevant and should have played like rook f4, allowing me to play here to take the pawn. But the idea is that thanks to this maneuver, after losing the pawn, my b4 pawn is too weak, and yeah, it's a draw. My last attempt would be obviously to play here, because after king b4, now I am winning the pawn endgame. But in here there is a very powerful move of rook f5. If I go down, it's like a draw is like always there, right? For in many different ways. But if I take the pawn, the case is that my opponent can try to deliver the check once more. And if I go like up the board, my pawn is disconnected from my pieces. So even though it seems like I might be winning, I will not be winning. And if I go down, he can try to basically transpose to once more Philidor position and defend the endgame. Is it easy, guys, now that I showed you that? Maybe. Is it easy though when you are under pressure for the last like 15 moves and you have less than a minute to figure that out? Maybe. That's why I am not harsh in my, let's say, opinion on my opponent's play, and also I'm happy because I won the game. But he didn't find the rook f4 idea. He decided, okay, defending the pawns is important stuff, so he went away with the king. But now I am just allowed to push the pawn, king d2, I gave a check, and if he goes down, now I can actually think about this move, because the pawn is already on b3, so there is no problem with that. And if that's the case, I can go further up the board with the king and win the game easily. And if he goes here to d3, I have rook c1 with the idea of b2, b1. So kind of similar one to the round number 1, right? In which I had the pawn on b2, I played the rook b1, rook c1 and pushed the pawn. And in here it's the same. The only task for me is to hide my king from the checks from the rook. And I did that by going to d6, c7, b6. This is the problem, so I had to cover the 8th rank, a6. And now that's the time when my opponent resigned the game. So guys, in the introduction I said that I have never won against an international master. It still does not change with that game. However, a win with black pieces against such a high rated opponent always feel nice and seems nice and is nice and so on. So amazing start to the tournament, 2.5 out of 3. We'll take that every time, every day. And hopefully you liked the game. It was, I believe, great CARLSBAD showcase of skills, let's say. Even my colleague said that he will be using this game for his students, so I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, if you liked the game as much as he did and as I did, leave a like, leave a comment if you wish, and we'll see each other in the next recap next day, so tomorrow. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.